Imagine a world where stepping outside your country's borders was a crime. A world where your job, your status, and even the clothes you wore were determined by a strict, unchangeable system. This was Japan under the rule of the Tokugawa Shogunate. 250 years of peace, but at a cost. The shogun wasn't just the ruler of Japan, he was Japan. He controlled the land, the laws, and even the emperor himself, who had been reduced to nothing more than a symbolic figurehead. The country was locked down. No foreign trade, no outside influence, no chance for rebellion. On the surface, it seemed like an unshakable empire. But beneath that calm, cracks were beginning to form. To understand why the shogun's downfall was so dramatic, we need to understand how they maintained control for so long. The Tokugawa family came to power in 1603. After centuries of brutal civil war, they promised one thing: order, and they delivered. They established a rigid social hierarchy that placed the shogun and the samurai at the top. Below them, farmers, artisans, and at the very bottom, merchants. Yep, the people making the most money were ranked the lowest, because the samurai saw trade as dishonorable. But here's where things get interesting. Despite the merchants' low status, they were quietly becoming rich. As the economy grew, they started lending money to the samurai. The warriors who were once feared across Japan were now drowning in debt. The balance of power was shifting, but no one wanted to admit it. To keep foreign ideas and potential threats out, the shogun enforced sakoku, the closed country policy. From the 1630s onward, Japan shut itself off from the world. No foreigners could enter, no Japanese could leave. The only exception, a small Dutch trading post on an artificial island in Nagasaki. The idea was simple. No outside influence meant no outside problems. But in reality, it meant Japan was falling behind. Fast. While Europe was industrializing, Japan was still relying on feudal agriculture. While other nations were building railroads and steamships, Japan was still using wooden carts and samurai swords. And yet, the shogunate held on, convinced that isolation was the key to stability. But here's the thing about isolation. It works until it doesn't. The world was changing, and Japan was about to get a wake-up call it never saw coming. The arrival of foreign influence. For over 200 years, Japan had been a fortress, completely sealed off from the outside world. No foreign influence, no global trade, no interference. The shogun believed that as long as they kept their doors shut, they could maintain absolute control. But in 1853, that illusion shattered. Imagine this, you're a fisherman in Edo, going about your daily routine. Suddenly, you see something on the horizon, something massive, something alien. Giant black ships, unlike anything Japan had ever seen, silently cutting through the waters of Tokyo Bay. These weren't wooden Japanese junks or small trading vessels. These were warships, powered by steam, bristling with cannons and flying the American flag. This was the moment that changed Japan forever. The man leading this fleet was Commodore Matthew Perry, a US naval officer with a mission: open Japan to the world, by force if necessary. America had been expanding its influence across the Pacific, and they wanted new trade routes. Japan, with its strategic location and untouched markets, was the perfect target. Perry's strategy was simple: shock and awe. He knew Japan's military was centuries behind the West, so instead of negotiating, he used intimidation. His fleet of Kurofune or Thubi black ships wasn't just there to talk, they were a message. These steam-powered warships were unlike anything Japan had ever seen, making their wooden defenses look like relics from a forgotten era. The shogunate was paralyzed. They had two options: open their borders or risk total annihilation. Perry made his demands, left behind a letter for the shogun, and promised to return the next year for an answer. Perry's visit was a wake-up call. For centuries, Japan had believed it was untouchable, but now they saw the brutal reality. They weren't just behind the West, they were centuries behind. If they resisted, they wouldn't stand a chance. 1 year later, Perry returned, and Japan had no choice but to sign the Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854. This treaty forced Japan to open its ports to American ships, marking the end of sakoku, the country's isolationist policy. What followed was a domino effect. Other Western nations, Britain, Russia, France, saw Japan's weakness and swooped in, demanding their own trade deals. The shogunate had lost control, and everyone knew it. This moment didn't just open Japan's doors, it shattered the entire foundation of the shogun's power. The people, once convinced that their rulers were invincible, started asking dangerous questions. If the shogun couldn't protect Japan from foreigners, then what were they even ruling for? And just like that, the cracks in the Tokugawa shogunate became impossible to ignore. But the real battle was just beginning. The samurai, the emperor, and the common people were about to clash in ways that would shake Japan to its core. Internal struggles and the samurai rebellion. With the arrival of the black ships and the forced opening of Japan's ports, The illusion of the shogun's invincibility was shattered. The people had trusted the Tokugawa government to keep Japan strong and independent. But now, foreign ships roamed Japanese waters, foreign merchants set up shop in once sacred cities, and foreign ideas started creeping into the minds of the people. This was no longer the Japan of old, and the cracks in the Tokugawa shogunate were widening at an alarming rate. For centuries, the samurai were the enforcers of order in Japan. They weren't just warriors, they were the backbone of the Tokugawa system. They lived by Bushido, the way of the warrior, loyalty, honor, discipline. But now, their world was crumbling. They were in debt. Merchants, once the lowest class in society, were now the wealthiest, lending money to samurai who had no real income. They were obsolete. Guns and Western military tactics were proving that samurai swords and traditional combat were outdated. They were losing power. With foreign nations forcing Japan to modernize, samurai privileges were being stripped away. Some samurai accepted the change and sought to modernize with Japan. Others, however, saw this as an unforgivable betrayal. The discontent wasn't just among the samurai. The common people, once bound by rigid social classes, started questioning the shogunate's rule. The economy was collapsing under the pressure of foreign trade, taxes were rising, and the government's corruption was more visible than ever. Meanwhile, the emperor, who had been nothing more than a puppet for centuries, suddenly became a symbol of hope. Many samurai and intellectuals began to rally behind Emperor Komei, and later, his successor Emperor Meiji, claiming that the emperor, not the shogun, should be the true leader of Japan. This movement, known as Sonojoi, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, gained momentum fast. Samurai factions from domains like Satsuma and Choshu saw the shogun as weak and incapable. They were done waiting. It was time to take action. By the 1860s, tensions had reached a breaking point. The Satsuma and Choshu clans, now armed with modern weapons and Western military training, formed an alliance against the Tokugawa shogunate. In 1868, the first shots of the Boshin War were fired. This wasn't just a battle for power, it was a battle for Japan's future. The shogunate forces relied on traditional samurai tactics, swords, cavalry, and honor-based warfare. The imperial forces, backed by Western nations, used rifles, cannons, and modern military strategies. The outcome was clear from the start. The shogunate's outdated ways couldn't compete with modern warfare. The samurai, once feared across Japan, were being cut down by bullets before they could even draw their swords. In just over a year, the Tokugawa shogunate collapsed. In 1869, the last shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, surrendered, marking the official end of samurai rule in Japan. The emperor was restored to power and Japan's doors were now fully open to modernization. But not everyone accepted this new era. Some samurai refused to give up their way of life. One last stand was coming, the legendary Satsuma Rebellion, led by the famous last samurai, Saigō Takamori. And that's where the real test of Japan's new era would begin. The Meiji Restoration, Japan's transformation into a modern power. With the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate and the crushing defeat of the samurai in the Satsuma Rebellion, Japan was at a crossroads. Would it cling to its past, or would it embrace the future? The answer came swiftly. Japan would not be left behind. The new government, led by Emperor Meiji, embarked on one of the most rapid and ambitious modernization projects in world history. In just a few decades, Japan went from a feudal society to a global power, rivaling even the Western nations that had once humiliated it. The first step in Japan's transformation was dismantling the rigid social structure that had defined the country for centuries. The samurai class was officially abolished. No more stipends, no more privileges, and no more hereditary warrior status. The feudal domains were dissolved. Instead of local lords ruling their own territories, Japan was reorganized into modern prefectures, governed by officials chosen by the central government. The caste system was erased. Commoners could now rise through merit, and samurai were no longer above the law. This wasn't just about social change, it was about unity. Japan had always been a land of competing domains, but now it was becoming a nation. The samurai may have been warriors, but they weren't equipped for modern warfare. The Meiji government knew that if Japan was to defend itself, it needed a military that could match the Western powers. A national conscription system was introduced. Every able-bodied male was required to serve, regardless of social status. Western-style training and weapons were adopted. Instead of swords and bows, Japan's new army used rifles, cannons, and disciplined tactics. The Imperial Japanese Navy was formed. Inspired by the British Royal Navy, Japan quickly built a powerful fleet capable of challenging Western ships. The results were astonishing. Within a few decades, Japan went from having a medieval military to defeating one of the world's greatest powers. If Japan wanted to compete on the world stage, it needed more than just a strong military. It needed a strong economy. The Meiji leaders knew this, and they wasted no time industrializing the nation. Railroads and telegraphs were built. Transportation and communication became faster than ever. Factories and shipyards sprung up. Japan rapidly developed its steel, textile, and weapons industries. Education was prioritized. A new school system was established, ensuring that Japan's future generations would be literate, skilled, and capable of innovation. Within just a few decades, Japan went from an agrarian society to an industrial powerhouse. It wasn't just industry and the military, Japan's entire culture was changing. The Meiji government actively encouraged westernization, adopting new customs, clothing, and even political ideas. A constitutional government was introduced. Inspired by European models, Japan created a modern legal system and established the Meiji Constitution in 1889. Western dress and manners became fashionable. Samurai robes were out, suits and military uniforms were in. Foreign advisors were brought in. Experts from Britain, France, Germany, and the US helped Japan build its railroads, industries, and military. But this wasn't just imitation. Japan wasn't blindly copying the West. It was learning, adapting, and improving. It took the best ideas from Europe and America and made them its own. By the early 1900s, Japan was no longer a weak, isolated country. It was a rising empire. It had modern factories, a powerful navy, and a highly trained army. And soon, it would put all of that to the test. In 1905, Japan shocked the world by defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, becoming the first Asian nation to defeat a European power in modern times. Less than 50 years after Commodore Perry's black ships forced Japan to open its doors, Japan had transformed itself into one of the most powerful nations on Earth. The Shogun's era was over. The samurai were gone. But Japan, it had just begun its rise. The end of the samurai, the birth of a superpower. And just like that, an era spanning over 700 years, the age of the samurai, came to a dramatic end. But was it really the end? In a way, the samurai spirit never died. Their influence is still deeply woven into Japan's culture, from the discipline seen in martial arts to the unshakable work ethic that drives the country's industries. Even today, terms like Bushido, the samurai code of honor, are referenced in everything from corporate culture to military philosophy. The fall of the shogunate and the Meiji Restoration didn't just mark the end of a warrior class, it marked the rebirth of Japan. A nation that was once isolated and feudal became one of the most powerful forces in the modern world in just a few decades. If there's one thing history teaches us, it's that change is unavoidable. The samurai tried to resist it, clinging to their traditions, but in the end, they were swept away by a force much greater than them: progress. But here's the real question. Was this change for the better? Japan became a global power, but at what cost? The rapid modernization led to imperial expansion, wars, and conflicts that shaped the 20th century. The samurai were wiped out, but their ideals lived on. Honor, discipline, and loyalty became ingrained in Japan's national identity. The Meiji Restoration transformed Japan, but could it have been done differently? If the samurai had adapted instead of resisted, could they have remained a part of Japan's new future? History isn't just a collection of dates and battles, it's a mirror. And Japan's transformation from a feudal state to a modern empire is one of the most incredible examples of how societies must either evolve or fade into history. So what do you think? If you were a samurai in the late 1800s, would you have fought to preserve the old ways, or would you have embraced the future? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history, check out our other videos on the truth behind Australia's origins as a British penal colony. Click on the next video, and I'll see you there.